I would like to welcome you all. My name is Erkut Gömülü. I'm the founding director of Boston Turkish Arts and Culture Festival, and we are celebrating our 30th year this year. And today's lecture, Neolithic Secrets Carved in Stone, by acclaimed tour guide and writer, speaker, filmmaker, Şerif Yenen, and right from Turkey. Actually, maybe some of you may remember in 2015, and we screened his documentary, Istanbul Unveiled, here at the Goethe Institute, November 14, 2015. And the following year, on 2016, screened the same film again at MFA with a full house. People enjoyed. Now, after more than 10 years and another opportunity, he's going to his presentation. Göbeklitepe, Karahantepe and Taş Tepeler, Stone Mounds. It's a really exciting presentation. Enjoy the lecture and thank you.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is such a great pleasure, such a great honor for me to be here with you face to face. And I would like to extend my thanks to the Boston Turkish Festival and our Consul General for their hospitality in here. And I would like to thank each one of you for taking the time and being here. And I'm going to take you on a journey today. It's going to be a very ancient journey. I'm going to take you back to like 12,000 years before now. So it is one of the most mind-blowing places in the world today. And as a tour guide, it has always been a great pleasure for me to observe all the changes, all the discoveries, starting with Göbeklitepe and continuing with the other very important site that is Karahantepe. And then finally, simultaneously, they are excavating more than 10 or almost 15 places now. And from each place, we have started getting enormous information, shedding light on the Neolithic culture. So as I always do, especially for those people who are not from Turkey, this is a good, very short introduction about the geography, about the location of our country. Take a look at the world map, and if I asked you where Turkey is located, you would point at the place which is right in the middle point of the three continents: Europe, Asia, and Africa, and that is Turkey. So as a result of this, we could say throughout history there have been more than 30 different peoples, civilizations, who have chosen Anatolia as their homeland. Anatolia is today's Turkey. So as a result, of course, being a tour guide becomes one of the most pleasurable things in the world. So this is the map of Turkey, and Turkey is rectangular in shape and surrounded by seas in three sides. It is the Black Sea in the north, it is the Aegean Sea in the west, and the other side of the Aegean is Greece, and then we have the Mediterranean in the south. And in between the Black Sea and the Aegean, there is one more sea here. It is like an inner sea, the only sea in the world, which is located within the boundaries of one country only. All the other seas in the world are bounded by more than one. So this is something very interesting. Both the Black Sea and the Marmara Sea look like lakes, but they are not, because they are all connected to each other. How is that possible? So the Black Sea here is connected to the Marmara Sea with a natural waterway here. That is the Bosphorus. The Bosphorus is the body of water, salt water, seawater, which is passing through the city of Istanbul. And likewise, the Marmara Sea has a connection with the Aegean Sea through another natural waterway here, that is the Dardanelles. You know, during the First World War, it was in here that the famous Gallipoli campaign took place, which was started by Winston Churchill. And in the southern shores of the Dardanelles in here is the ancient city of Troy there. Other than that, we can say the lands of Turkey are actually located on two continents. Just a little bit of it is in Europe, and the majority of the lands of Turkey lie in Asia. Where's the border? The border is the Bosphorus, the border is the Sea of Marmara, and the border is the Dardanelles. So this little land here, which is like 3% of Turkey, is a part of Europe, and all the rest in here is part of Asia, and 97% of Turkey lies in Asia, and throughout history, it has been named as Asia Minor or Anatolia. These are both biblical names mentioned in the Bible. Asia Minor, because this is somewhat the westernmost point of the Asian continent, with almost all of the characteristics of the Asian continent. That's why it is the little version of Asia here, Little Asia, Asia Minor. Anatolia is a beautiful word, an ancient Greek word, meaning the land of sunrise. So it was the Greeks who lived in the West, and from their perspective, Anatolia was the place where the sun rose from. So the land of sunrise was named accordingly. As for our neighbors, just shortly, we have two neighbors in Europe. One is Greece and the other is Bulgaria. And we have many more neighbors in here. We have Georgia up there, Armenia, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. So it's a melting pot. A little bit about the geography. The highest mountain in Turkey is a biblical mountain, and that's Mount Ararat, and it is located in Turkey, in here, near the Armenian border, near the Iranian border. The highest mountain, meaning like 16,000 feet, more than 5,000 meters. And it is the place where Noah's Ark is believed to have landed after the flood. So it is still there. I mean, the mountain is there. And the other, I mean, there are some expedition teams coming over to Mount Ararat every year or every once in a while. Sometimes they claim they have found it. It may well be possible as well. The largest lake in Turkey is Lake Van, V-A-N. It is a lake with bitter water because it's a volcanic area there. And the local people there, they don't call it a lake, they call it a sea, Van Sea, because it is such a big body of water there. The second largest body of water is in central Anatolia. That is the Salt Lake. Salt is Tuz, 33% salt in the water. About 40% of the salt that we use in Turkey comes from that lake there. Then we have the beautiful mountain range going parallel to the Mediterranean coastline. They are the Taurus Mountains. They go up until here. And then we have one more mountain range in the north, the North Anatolian Mountains. They go parallel to the Black Sea coastline as well. And then we have two very important biblical rivers originating from the high mountains of eastern Anatolia and going down to Syria and Iraq. And the names of these two rivers are the Euphrates and the Tigris. So the Euphrates is this one, originating from here and going down to Syria. And this is the Tigris, and Tigris is going down to Iraq. And Euphrates, after meandering through the lands of Syria for a while, it goes into Iraq and merges with the other river, the Tigris, and they flow into the Persian Gulf together as one river. What is more important here, the land in between these two rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris, it has been named as Mesopotamia. It's another Greek word, and it means between the two rivers. Metso is middle, Potamia is rivers, so between the rivers. What is important in Mesopotamia, after 1 million years of hunting and gathering, the Paleolithic people started settling down in here. So this is what we are going to talk about today. Actually, I just want to highlight one more city here. This is Şanlıurfa city, one of the big cities in Turkey. And just outside the city of Şanlıurfa is Göbeklitepe, and a little farther outside is Karahantepe. So we're going to focus on these areas. So just to give you a general idea, you're going to remember this from history lessons. According to the tools and the raw materials used at the time, experts divided the ages throughout history into names derived from the tools and the raw materials. So the first period was named as the Paleolithic, and then the Mesolithic, and then the Neolithic, and then the Chalcolithic, and then the Bronze Age, and then the Iron Age. Whatever they used at the time, they named the period with that material. So Paleolithic means paleo is old, lithos is stone, the old Stone Age. In the case of Anatolia, it is going back to like 1.1 million years before now. And in itself, it is divided into three periods, the lower, the middle, and the upper Paleolithic. And then comes the Mesolithic period. Mesolithic is the middle Stone Age, and that is like the transition period. And then comes our age, so our topic today, the Neolithic Age. So we're going to focus on that. And after the Neolithic Age, actually came the Copper Stone Age, that is the Chalcolithic. And then copper and tin were mixed together to make an alloy, and that alloy was named as the Bronze. And the Bronze Age comes after that. And then comes the Iron Age. Iron requires a lot of heat, and for a long time, ancient people were not able to reach that heat. That's why they couldn't shape iron. Although they had iron in nature, they were not able to make tools from it. So making iron tools was only possible after the Bronze Age. So it goes back to like 1200 BC and so on. This is the Paleolithic Age from 1,100,000 until about 16,000 BC. So in the first phase of the Paleolithic Age, it was the Homo erectus. And in the second phase, it was the Neanderthals. And in the last phase, it was the Homo sapiens. The Paleolithic itself is divided into three periods. These were the hunter-gatherers. They didn't have settled life. They were always running after food, and they were able to survive with the animals that they were hunting, with the wild crops that they were collecting from nature, and living conditions were very difficult. I don't know if you ever heard about this discovery. This is a recent discovery from about like 20-something years before now, in an area called Denizli in here. They found some fossils of the skull of the Homo erectus, which was later on identified to be 1.1 million years old. So this has been the first piece of bone belonging to humans, I mean early humans, the Homo erectus, found in Anatolia. So what I was saying in the beginning of the presentation, Anatolia has always been a crossroads, has always been a bridge. So on the way to and from Africa, the Homo erectus passed through Anatolia and leaving marks behind as well. So this is a larger view of the same fossil piece from the skull discovered in Denizli area. And another very important cave from Turkey is Karahan Cave from Antalya. And this is the only cave with all three phases of the Paleolithic Age. And here is a skull piece, again, belonging to the Neanderthals from the Paleolithic Age in Anatolia. As you see, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the Mesolithic Age here. It is from 16,000 until about 10,000. Mesolithic is the transition from the Old Stone Age to the New Stone Age. The New Stone Age is the Neolithic Age. So there's only one site from the Mesolithic Age in importance, which is becoming very important. That is the Öküzini Cave. This is also in the area of Antalya. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the map of Anatolia from about 20,000 BC until about 14,000. So this was the time in which global warming was occurring. So global temperatures rose gradually, massive ice sheets started melting, sea levels rose, affecting coastal areas, and from around 14,700 onwards, a sudden and significant warming period started. Expansion of wild cereals and grasses was seen, more stable climates for hunter-gatherers and so on. So it all happened in Mesopotamia. So it was extremely important. That's why the hunter-gatherers of the Paleolithic Age, because of the convenience in here, they started gathering up in the areas of Mesopotamia, and it was easier for them to reach food. So over the time, they were able to discover the fact that whenever they replanted the seeds in the right places with the right timing, they were able to get crops. So they discovered agriculture. When they were able to discover agriculture, they were able to get extra crops, like surplus food. So when they had surplus food, they got relaxed. They didn't need to run after the food as much. So they didn't need to migrate around. They were able to settle down. So this is how the settled life started. And the name of the period now has changed to the Neolithic period. Agriculture came first, and then settled life followed. So this is the area that we are going to focus. This is Mesopotamia. It is also named as the Fertile Crescent, and almost all of the early settlements are taking place in here. That's why it is named as the Fertile Crescent, because the location of these sites make a curve in the middle. In the Şanlıurfa city, there used to be a German archaeologist, and his name was Klaus Schmidt. And, you know, in the areas of the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers, in the past 35, 40 years, our government has been working on lots of water projects. Water projects meaning like artificial dams for power, for irrigation, and lots of construction of the artificial dams was forming a big risk for the archaeologists. Because when they build a dam, there's going to be a lot of water lying behind that. And that means if there is any ancient things underneath the water, they are going to be lost. That's why we started a big campaign about 35, 40 years ago, and they located all those archaeological sites, and then they made some international calls, and they started excavating the sites. So suddenly, more than 100 unexpected, unplanned excavations, rescue excavations were started, and they started to give lots of information about especially the Neolithic period. So Mr. Klaus Schmidt was working on one of these projects in a place named as Nevali Çöri, and the excavation is finished there now. And whatever they were able to rescue from there, they took them to the museum. And the whole area where Nevali Çöri is located today is filled with the water of the Atatürk Dam today. So Mr. Klaus Schmidt, the German archaeologist, was able to discover a lot of things from Nevali Çöri, and he was getting a lot of interest in the Neolithic era, and he knew that there must have been other sites in the area. And upon some research, he found Göbeklitepe. This is the site of Göbeklitepe in here. See, it is a very arid land, just like 12 kilometers outside the city of Şanlıurfa. And there's a hill there with a mulberry tree. There are a few burials there. Every year, very interestingly, it can't be a coincidence, the people from around would gather there at some certain times of the year, in the equinox especially. And they are going to sacrifice animals there. They are going to have rituals there. And they are going to tie some pieces of cloth to the tree there with an expectation of having children. This was happening there. So Klaus Schmidt located this site, the hillside, just down below the mulberry tree here, to be an archaeological site. He went back to Germany, and he got the support of the Archaeological Institute of Germany. And then they got the necessary permissions from the Turkish Ministry of Culture and Tourism. And in 1995, he started excavating this site. This is Göbeklitepe. So this is the site that Mr. Klaus Schmidt was excavating from before, Nevali Çöri. This is a photo from the Museum of Archaeology in Şanlıurfa. So there is nothing left in Nevali Çöri because it is all around, all around it is the Atatürk Dam today. So all of these pieces here are pieces, the original pieces, which were excavated in Nevali Çöri. So after starting the excavations in Göbeklitepe, 19 years later, unfortunately, Mr. Klaus Schmidt passed away, but the same team who were digging with Mr. Klaus Schmidt are still continuing with the excavations today. We're going to come to the details of these now. But before I start speaking about Göbeklitepe, I would like to share with you a small piece of stone carved, going back to like 8,000 something years. And what do you see in this picture? I see one person here dancing, and I see another person here dancing, halay gibi. And there is something like a turtle in the middle, but they are having fun. So this is one of the most ancient pieces which is exhibited in the Museum of Archaeology today. This was excavated from the Neolithic site. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the whole site of Göbeklitepe, it is such a big area actually, would be like 300 meters by 300 or by feet, 1,000 feet by 1,000 feet. And it is a very large site. And Klaus Schmidt started the excavations from here. This was the first circular enclosure that he excavated, and then he kept digging and he discovered more circular enclosures around. And this is a picture that I took from like, I don't know, 90s maybe, or maybe 2000 something. Back then, we were able to go in there. And these are my American visitors. We are touring there, and we are shaking hands with Klaus Schmidt, and he's sharing his excitement with us over there. And back there, you're going to see the mulberry tree that I was mentioning. But today, Göbeklitepe had to be covered with an awning to protect the site from the bad weather conditions. And they don't allow us to go inside the site anymore. We can only make a tour around it. And they are going to open new sections soon. So this is the present day view of Göbeklitepe. What did they find here? What was so important? What was so mind-blowing here? Let's focus on these. First of all, they found T-shaped pillars standing, buried in the sand, in the soil. But these T-shaped pillars were forming a circular form with two more T-shaped pillars in the center, taller than the ones around. And these places were all systematically buried. That's why they have been preserved well. So when Klaus Schmidt started digging, they found all of these pillars, or most of these pillars, intact, still standing in their original seats, in their original places. That was so important. Never before, so many of these pillars, so old, were found together. It was the first mind-blowing feature about this place. So these pillars are gigantic in size, sometimes like human size, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times taller than the human size. And they are weighing tons. And when they did the carbon dating, the date was identified to be from about 9,600 BC. So very similar to what we have in the Stonehenge, but about 6,500 years before the Stonehenge. I mean, really surprising information kept coming from there. What is more important, what is more interesting here, they studied the carbonized seeds in the area, and they discovered that none of these carbonized seeds were cultivated seeds. They were wild seeds. What does that mean? Wild seeds, pre-agriculture. So it was still the hunter-gatherers who built these gigantic structures. So whatever we knew from before came upside down. Because as I mentioned at the beginning of my introduction, agriculture came first and then settled life followed. Now we understand that it is vice versa. Very interesting. Agriculture came later. So if we look at the plan of Göbeklitepe, this is enclosure A. This is where Klaus Schmidt started excavating first. So he named these enclosures with the order of the excavation. The second one is just next door, another circular building. And the third one, C and D. And then he found 2 more. So 6 enclosures altogether have been excavated so far. But they did the georadar scanning underground, and they found in total about 200 of these pillars, T-shaped pillars. So that means these 6 enclosures are only 6 of maybe more than 20 enclosures. So they are still waiting to be excavated. They are not rushing. They are excavating a lot, and then they pause a little, they study whatever is obtained. Many other scientists, not only archaeologists, are working in the area, and they are publishing, and they are learning from each other. So things are getting more sophisticated over the time. But the more they have dug, instead of finding more answers to our questions, we now have more questions in our minds. So things are getting more intricate, more complicated. So more than 20 circular buildings. Each circular building has about 10, 12 pillars. Total 250, maybe 300 gigantic size pillars. And one wonders, how was it possible? Well, ladies and gentlemen, what did I say? The date? 9,600. 9,600 was still the Stone Age. They didn't have any metal tools. So these gigantic size pillars were shaped, carved by other harder pieces of rocks. What are going to be the harder pieces of rocks? Either flint or obsidian. So they were cut from the bedrock, and they were carried by hundreds of people to nearby places, and then by using architectural geniuses, they were able to erect these places. This is how they might have carried these gigantic pillars, by rolling them on logs. This is a beautiful picture that I just took from the Airport Museum in Istanbul. It's a nice picture giving us a sense of how they might have been put together or erected. So what have we learned from the excavations so far? First of all, we learned that these people are not primitive people, as we always thought. 10,000 BC would be cave peoples. What would they know? They would know everything. We have to understand that. We have to appreciate that. So they must have had division of labor among themselves. Otherwise, 300, 400 people cannot say, oh, come on, guys, let's lift them up. It doesn't work like that. So there must be some higher class people giving them orders. And another very interesting thing, very sophisticated animal figures or human figures, sometimes carvings, sometimes reliefs on these stones, with aesthetic concerns. So these so-called primitive people knew about architecture, knew about the measurements, knew about aesthetics, arts, sculpture, and sometimes they liked the things, sometimes they asked the sculptors to renew the pieces, for example. So we should understand that they had them all. Somehow, they must have needed these large buildings. We still don't know what these large buildings were. We shall discuss that as well. And they needed these large enclosures, and they were able to build them. So this is a fact. The very interesting part of the story is that from about 9,600, from about 9,700, these enclosures in Göbeklitepe must have been used for about 1,500 years, and then something must have happened. Maybe climate conditions changed. Something must have happened. They wanted to go somewhere else. But they didn't want to leave these things open. What did they do? They systematically buried these enclosures. There are debates on that. I'm going to mention it as well. So they had a very sophisticated understanding of life. This is the bottom line. What makes Göbeklitepe such an important site is not only its long history, going back to 12,000 years ago. It also shows that early humans, often labeled as primitive hunter-gatherers, were advanced enough to build monumental structures with aesthetic concerns and sophisticated understanding of symbolism as well. They had complex social structures and cultural practices long before the development of agriculture. These are the scientific facts. This is the enclosure A in here, the first enclosure where Klaus Schmidt started excavating. In comparison to the others, this is the most primitive one, but the others get more sophisticated. What kind of animal figures were they able to find in here? Look at the animals. These animals were mostly from daily life, like cranes, foxes, aurochs. So these are the modern day pictures and the carvings found on these stones. And this is enclosure B. You see there are 2 pillars standing in the middle, and there are 10, 12 pillars making a circle around. And the floor is covered with a mosaic type of a floor, and they had walls connecting these pillars in the circle. And again, fox figures in here. Then in some of the enclosures, they found sometimes circular, sometimes rectangular pieces of stone. So these pieces of stones were identified to be portal stones, entrances, doors to these buildings. The doors were thought to be on the ceiling, like in this one. So these buildings actually were covered on the ceiling, and they had their doors there. Right underneath the door, there was a fireplace, and the door on the ceiling would be functioning like a chimney as well. So the smoke coming from the hearth would be going out. This is enclosure C, a very, very intricate one. There are 2 layers of walls in this one. And there's, most of the times, there's a bench in the inner circle. And you see between the benches, there are these T-shaped pillars. What we understand from these different size enclosures, they must have sometimes been expanded or made smaller. This explains why there are different layers of walls. Sometimes it's a bigger building. After a few hundred years, it gets deteriorated. So what they do, they ignore the building, they ignore the wall outside, so they built a new set of walls inside. So that's why they have layers of walls. This is still enclosure C from a different angle. And in one part of this enclosure C, in here, take a look, the animal figure here. In the first phases, we thought this animal would be something like a reptile, but the most recent interpretation by the experts is going to be a Persian leopard, like in the picture. And this is enclosure D. This is more or less the same size like enclosure C, but the central 2 pillars in the center are much taller than anything else. And some of the motifs in here are shown here, but in the next slide, let's look at it together. Well, ladies and gentlemen, these Göbeklitepe people were able to make pictures like this, and definitely by making these pictures, they were trying, or they were telling some stories which we don't know today, but they were able to express their stories to each other. So what pictures we see here were the common pictures, and when they made the picture there, they understood what it meant, which we are unable to understand today. So these are the early forms, very early forms of picture writing, in a way, or pictograms, maybe. Let's see what they have here. There's a vulture here, and you see the wings of the vulture, and above one wing is a sphere. We will come to that. Here's another bird. Here are more birds. And look at these bag motifs in a row, bags in a row. Look at these intricate looking motifs. We don't know. And there's a scorpion here. There's another big bird here. See this figure? That figure belongs to a man, but the head is missing. Could the sphere here be the head of this man? Could be. This is still enclosure D, and in the Museum of Archaeology in Şanlıurfa, they made a one-to-one replica of enclosure D. So when we go to Göbeklitepe, we are not able to go inside these enclosures anymore. But when we are in the museum, we are able to go inside here. So we can feel how big they are when we are in these buildings. The two central megaliths are fitting in carved sockets. So the depth of the socket is like a foot, like 30 centimeters approximately. So these large-size pillars weighing tons will not be able to stand in a 30 centimeter deep socket. What do we understand from this? The central pillars actually were the stands, architectural elements of the building, holding the roof on top. So whatever the material that they used in the roof, it could be something like the thatched roof, or it could be something like a adobe roof with a combination of woods, pieces of wood, and so on. They were, the two central pillars were attached to the pillars around by beams, and then the roof was covered. And very interesting thing also, these pillars are believed to represent humans. How is that possible? This side of the upper part of the pillar, the T, is representing the face of the human, and it is the same thing in here. Look at the arms. The left arm with the left elbow and the hands are here. Let's look at the same picture from the other angle. Right arm and the hands are coming close to each other in the front. There is a figure of a fox here, and same thing here. The right arm with the elbow, and you can see the fingers in here as well. Let's look at it from closer distance. The two hands are coming close to each other, just above the belt, and you can count the correct number of fingers. And the belt looks very sophisticated, very intricate, and underneath the belt is hanging a loincloth made from a fox skin. This is the buckle actually. The belt is continuing towards the back, and look at the motifs on the belt as well. So these pillars are in the same time representing human characters. Were these circular buildings covered with roofs? Yes, we just mentioned that. We believe that they were all covered. Otherwise, these soft stones, limestone, if they stayed open air, they wouldn't last for 1,000 years, 1,500 years. After about 30, 40, 50 years, they would get deteriorated. Definitely, these buildings were all covered. And how exactly they were covered is still a question mark, but maybe like any of these in the picture. So many of these enclosures probably were like half underground buildings as well. The T-shaped pillars were important architectural elements providing support for the ceilings or floors of the upper stories. Well, ladies and gentlemen, in 2006, Der Spiegel featured Göbeklitepe with this title, The Garden of Eden. Consider the proximity to the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers as well. The Euphrates and the Tigris rivers are the two of the four streams coming from the Garden of Eden. The Geo magazine in 2008 said the earliest man-made temple. The National Geographic, the international version of the National Geographic, in 2011 featured it in the cover, and it said, the birth of religion, the world's first temple. These are sensational, and it drew a lot of attention from all around the world. And Mr. Klaus Schmidt was good in using the media And thanks to this interest coming from abroad, they were able to draw a big attention from scholars, and they were able to get funding from sponsors, and they were able to carry out a big archaeological work in here. So were these buildings really temples? How should we regard them? For example, they found butchered animal bones in Göbeklitepe. They found a stone vessel, like in this picture. The capacity of the stone vessel is 160 liter, and they found a residue of a fermented drink in this. So these remind us some religious or social gatherings like festivals. Klaus Schmidt didn't mind using the word temple, but archaeologists were divided into two. And some archaeologists didn't like the word temple because they said the temple that we know in today's understanding, how would we name it as a temple without knowing anything about their religious belief systems or so on? So that's why they said we shouldn't use the word temple. So over the time, the safest terminology for these enclosures would be special gathering places. That is the safest terminology, rather than the word temple. Because, for example, there's a professor who is in charge of the Stone Mounds project, who is excavating Karahantepe as well, Necmi Karul. He says naming it as a temple would limit the function of this building or of these buildings. So we can't say temple. Temple, you do only one thing there. You worship there or whatever. But these probably were used for social purposes too. Social gatherings, special events, rituals, so with many other functions. But when there were no other sites except for Göbeklitepe, Klaus Schmidt's first theory, Göbeklitepe, he said, should be a gathering place. And because in the early stages of the excavations, because he excavated these gigantic buildings first, he didn't find any traces of settlement. No houses, no traces of living from people. So only these circular buildings, special buildings. Then he said, this must be a gathering place for those people who live in an area of like 200 kilometers. At some certain times of the year, they must have come here and they must have gathered here. They must have socialized with each other, did whatever they did. But now this idea has changed because after Karahantepe and many other sites around, and after the death of Klaus Schmidt, the excavation team was able to excavate housing, the buildings in which people lived. They found, and Klaus Schmidt said, there's no water here. There can't be anyone living in here, he said. But now they found some cisterns. They found fireplaces, hearths. They found plates. So they found lots of living traces. And not only that, in the other places like Karahantepe, Çakmaktepe, Sefertepe, Gürcütepe, all of these mounds, they found these circular buildings there as well, together with the residential buildings. So now the conclusion has changed to each place was a settlement, and they had their homes in these settlements, and in addition to their homes, they also had their special buildings. So people didn't need to come to Göbeklitepe from anywhere else because they had their own special buildings in their own settlements. This is the new conclusion. Please, you just write Göbeklitepe in a search engine. See what kind of information you will be able to gather. It is hard for us to understand how these primitive people were able to build so many sophisticated structures. So, because it is hard to understand that, then people start making speculations. Was it the aliens? Or was it the Atlantis? Was it this? Was it that? So one of the biggest problems with the archaeologists today, these kinds of people are coming with some certain ideas, some certain theories, and they are even trying to interfere the work of the archaeologists there. So I don't want to say anything bad or good about these, but I would like to bring to your attention. Göbeklitepe was added to the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2018, and I have some interesting facts about the animals in here. More than 100 pieces of bones were studied from Göbeklitepe. From the cut marks, they were believed to be the bones of butchered animals. More than 60% of them were bones from gazelles. It's more than 60. The other 40% of the bones, animal bones, were boar, sheep, deer, and some birds like vulture, duck, crane, and goose. Isn't that interesting? So far, 2 burials with 4 individuals have been discovered in Göbeklitepe. They wish they found more because from the burials it is easy to study more things. They were not buried in burial grounds or cemeteries. Typically, they were buried beneath the floors of the domestic buildings. This is the same thing in Çatalhöyük, for example. Çatalhöyük is from central Anatolia from 2,000 years later. So another interesting fact, when we look at the floors of these special buildings, they are always waterproof. Sometimes they just carve the bedrock, so it is the bedrock itself, and they make it plain, and it is the floor there. But sometimes we come across with a different floor, which is named as the terrazzo floor. Terrazzo floors are made with mortar. They have pieces of stones, and they fix these stones with a mortar, and mortar is made with burnt lime, kireç. So 12,000 years ago, the Göbeklitepe people, the hunter-gatherers, were able to make mortar from burnt lime, and they were able to make mosaic floors. This is how they worked. Or another alternative for the floors, they have flat pieces of stones, but in all of them, it is always waterproof. So why do you need the waterproof floor? There must be something with a liquid there. Are they sacrificing anything? Are they pouring libations? Something must be going on there. So that's why they had to make the floors waterproof. When we look at the animals also, we don't see the animals to be mythological animals. These are animals, very simple animals from daily life. Göbeklitepe people, who knows, might be worshipping nature like in the shamanistic cultures. I love these few pictures in here. Look at the beauty of this animal. The first few centuries in the Neolithic period, like at least 2,000 years, the early Neolithic people didn't know or didn't make pots. All of the tools or all of the vessels, the plates that they had, were made from stones. Very interesting. So in the stone, you can't have food with juice. Sulu aş, impossible. So we understand that in the early phases, when they didn't have the pots, pottery, they didn't eat food with juice. They must have eaten barbecues. But it is really difficult to understand. In the first 2,000 years, the Göbeklitepe people didn't know how to make pots, pottery, which is just from clay, you know. They didn't do that. But they were able to make very beautiful, very stylized statues or sculpture or reliefs, like in this picture. It is really difficult to understand. This is a recent discovery, only from two years before. They found this statue of a boar in enclosure D. It is exhibited in the museum today. But look at the teeth. Do you see any colors? Red color. These Göbeklitepe people used natural pigments to paint their statues. These are the statues found in Göbeklitepe, which are exhibited in the museum today. When we look at the animal figures, we always see the animal figures as masculine. We can see the sexual organs of the animals, in most cases in erection. There is only one figure belonging to a female. This is what it is in here. What do you see there? What would your interpretation be? By looking at the breast, unproportional, it must be a female. Her hairstyle, or something like a helmet. She is squatting, and there's something coming out from her sexual organ. Is it possible that she is delivering a baby? 2,000 years after this, in Çatalhöyük, 2,000 years after this, in Çatalhöyük, they found a little statue made out of clay of a woman, the mother goddess of Anatolia. She's sitting in a throne. She has two feline animals on the two sides, and her legs are a little ajar, and there's a baby coming out from between the legs. So she is symbolizing fertility, abundance. She has given birth to many children before, and she is giving another birth to a new child in here. So this is a similarity. Well, ladies and gentlemen, now I'm going to speed up a little. This was the information that we were able to gather from Göbeklitepe. Then Necmi Karul, a very notable archaeologist from Turkey, he said, if you want to understand Göbeklitepe better, we have to look around. That's why they made very quick surveys all around, and they spotted many more places, and then simultaneously they started excavating those other sites as well. So they named this new project as the Stone Mounds Project. This happened only during the COVID period. So Professor Necmi Karul, in the COVID period, started excavating himself a new site named as Karahantepe. But Göbeklitepe and Karahantepe are not the only. Look at the other tepe. They have many more there, and in many of them there are excavations. Just a few pictures to give you an idea. Sefertepe. Look at the pillars. These are the early stages of the excavation. They are going to go deeper. So they are going to reach the full height of these T-shaped pillars, for example. They are not there yet. Look at the animal figure from Sefertepe. Gürcütepe, Çakmaktepe. You see, this is another enclosure. So it is the bedrock itself here. And the pillars should have been on the sides with the walls. Sayburç. They found the most unusual thing in Sayburç. Take a look at the next slide. What do we see here? A relief of a man holding his phallus in erection. And there are two animals looking at the man in the center. Keep this in mind. We're going to see similar things. A closer look. It has something like a color in here. 2 lines, 3 lines. Then let's go to Karahantepe now. Karahantepe is the same age like Göbeklitepe. They have more or less the same things like the enclosures like in Göbeklitepe, also in Karahantepe, but they have additionally a few more interesting places. These are some examples from the unfinished T-shaped pillars, still getting carved, but it was not finished and they left the place. And these are the enclosures. Generally speaking, the big ones are the special buildings, and the smaller ones are generally smaller special buildings or residential buildings. Architectural style is always the same. In the early phases of the Neolithic period, these ancient people were able to make circular buildings easily. Only after about 1,000 years, 1,500 years, they were able to make some more rectangular buildings. Making a rectangle is more difficult than making a circular building. The corners, the angles are difficult. So they were not directly able to make rectangular buildings. The corners were still curved a little bit. So look at this, the enclosure AD There is another construction here, or enclosure here, and there's one more in here, and there are more all around. So AD is very similar to what we saw in Göbeklitepe. This part is the main part of the rock, and they didn't need to build any new wall here. They just carved whatever was available in the rock. But in here, they had to build the walls. And the T-shaped pillars are all around here. And in most cases, they found these T-shaped pillars lying down on the floor. Instead of trying to bury that high building, sometimes what they did before they left the site, they just put them down, or they cut them halfway, and they put one half of the T-shaped pillar on the floor, and then they buried them. The new team in Göbeklitepe claimed this was not, Göbeklitepe was not buried by man. They claimed that. They were buried by floods or landslides and so on. But I spoke to almost every other archaeologist from every other side. They don't agree with this. Klaus Schmidt didn't agree with this either. But somehow this new team published an article, and they said it was not systematically buried. So I just wanted to let you know about this as well. So, for example, in Karahantepe, definitely the place was buried by people. What is interesting in Karahantepe, in addition to the central special building, they have two more chambers here. Especially this chamber blows my mind away. Let's take a look at it. Take a look. This is the main enclosure. And next door is a pit. And there's a window in between the two. And there's one more just behind the other one. So we have to take this like a big complex. They must have considered to be together. They must have been built together. Look at this. This is the regular circular enclosure. This is the new pit next to it. Here is the window in between the two. And there are a few steps right after the window going down into this pit. And what is in this pit? Let's take a look. The size of this pit is like this. There are 11 phalluses which were not erected here, but they were carved in the bedrock here. Only one piece in here is representing a leopard, and it was not carved in the main rock. They opened a socket there, and they brought it from outside, and they erected it there. So 11 phalluses, one leopard. Look at this man. It's the relief of a man, the head of a man. He is holding his head like this, like that of a snake, and he has big lips. He's observing whatever is happening there. And this is a different angle. This is the leopard. This is the close-up of the man observing everything in there. And this is the window in between the two buildings. And you can see the steps here. So from the slope of the steps, archaeologists were able to tell that the steps in here were used to go inside this pit. And there is a water canal, not water, we don't know if it is water. There's a liquid canal flowing into this. And look, the entry is from here, and there are steps in here to go out. So Professor Necmi Karul says, if you're entering in one building from one side and going out from the other side, something must be happening there. So he says, this reminds us the initiation ceremonies, rituals for manhood. Among 11 phalluses, one leopard there. There's a liquid in there. We don't know what liquid it is. Is it blood? Is it a holy drink? Is it water? We don't know. Something is happening there. And after this process, and probably it is just an idea, whoever is entering from one end is coming out from the other end as a man. He proves himself to be a man. So it is like an initiation ceremony. The phalluses were also filled in, buried. And they put stones on top of every phallus, like in here. So as they kept digging, the phalluses came out. So definitely, this is the proof for the man-made systematic burial. There are a few good examples from the same pit, and a few more examples from the smaller size buildings. And very recently, just like a few weeks ago, you might have read this in papers, they found something new in Karahantepe. And in one of the small buildings, one of the T-shaped pillars has the face of a man. So this is the most recent discovery in Karahantepe. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm coming close to the end. This is also another mind-blowing discovery in here. The main enclosure is down there, and recently they started excavating another enclosure with the T-shaped pillars around, and suddenly they found a statue of a big man in here. This man. Closer distance, look at this man here. And they found some stone plates in here, and also let's look at the man from a closer distance. Look at this man, 240 centimeter tall. You can count the exact and correct number of ribs. Correct. And see, his two arms is holding his phallus again. His phallus is in erection. So the interpretation of this, the upper part of this statue is representing the dead, because it's the skeleton there. And the lower part of the body is representing the life, with the phallus in erection. Just a little farther up from him, they found the statue of a bird, this bird here. And this bird is exhibited in the museum as well. In Karahantepe, as opposed to Göbeklitepe, they found lots of human statues. There are a few statues of humans carrying leopards on their back. You see the face of the man here, and this is the leopard. So a man carrying a leopard on his back. Did he hunt it, and he is proving himself to be a man? We don't know. It was found right in here. Lots of human heads with distinctive faces. These are plates made out of stone, carved from stone. Some animal figures. So what we can conclude between Göbeklitepe and Karahantepe, they are both from the same time period, from about 9,600, 9,700. They were used for about 1,500 years. It is the same. Göbeklitepe, now we know that it is not the only place, and there are many other places around. So Göbeklitepe is not a gathering place. This is the new information. And megaliths are almost everywhere in every site. And we see more animals in Göbeklitepe, but more humans in Karahantepe. As for animals, more foxes in Göbeklitepe, but more leopards in Karahantepe. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope I was able to create a lot of curiosity in your minds.